I'm Melinda Bell, and I am here for your CPI Refresher. So let's go ahead and get started. The first escalation that we're going to look at today is release. And release is categorized as an emotional outburst, screaming, crying, or swearing. Now, a release is just that. It is a release, verbally, usually in a way that's not desirable, right? But it does allow venting for the student, for the business owner, for the parent, for the patient, right? So it's very important that as a response to a release, we allow venting. Now, along with that venting, it is also really important that we protect those around, right, from experiencing, uncomfortability, anxiety, their own set of trauma triggers as they experience someone who is releasing. And so the next thing we need to do is remove the audience or remove the person. Now, this is a touchy subject. CPI does not have an authorized safety intervention that involves moving a person from one place to another. So if CPI is the model that you use for your organization, then the recommended thing at this point, if there's just release, is to remove the audience. If your organization uses another platform, another modality in addition to CPI, it is definitely acceptable for you to use that safe intervention to physically move a child or adult. The reason why this is important is that CPI is least restrictive, which means we want to start with the lowest level to impact the person first. And we also want to make sure we're being trauma informed. And when we are touching a student, moving a student, restraining a student, that is something that is definitely potential to cause trauma or trigger trauma in the individual. We also, in this moment, want to use very simple directives that are non-threatening with a soothing voice. Now, this is super important. Again, especially if they're swearing or screaming and that's directed at you, it is very, very natural to want to yell, snap, things like that. But what we know about the brain is that when one person walks into a space and they are extremely elevated, and another person walks into a space and they are completely level, it is more likely for that brain and body that is escalated to come down to a normal level if there is a soothing tone. You want to think about that idea, the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat, right? A thermometer just measures what's in the room, right? If I come in and somebody's on 10 and I'm on 10, I'm a thermometer. But if I'm a thermostat, I come in and I set the tone for what's happening in the space, right? So let's go to the next one. The next escalated behavior we're going to look at is refusal. Now, refusal is explained as non-compliance, which could be a verbal no, it could be walking away, it could be a non-verbal no. There are 4 different types of limit setting that help and support when there is refusal. Now, it's very, very important, and we'll talk about this later when we get to safety interventions. There are no CPI safety interventions for non-compliance, which means there is no restraint that is equal to non-compliance, okay? So the 4 limit setting ideas are interrupt and redirect, which sounds like you're shouting, please speak quietly. The when-then pattern, when you lower your voice, then I'll be able to help. The if-then pattern, if you lower your voice, then I'll be able to help. And my personal favorite, the fail-safe choice. Now, the fail-safe choice is really special because both ends of their choice are what I want and what needs to happen, right? But the person, the individual, gets to choose between two options, right? So fail-safe choice might sound like, would you like to talk about this now, or would you like to talk about this at recess? And if the problem is raising voices, like, would you like to talk about this quietly now, or would you like to talk about this with a louder voice in private, right? So we want to make sure the goal is to talk about it, right? And we do want to make sure we raise our hand for all that somatic training that we've had, knowing that you have to make sure that the brain is back online, especially if you're working with a child or an adult, that you want to make sure that brain is back online, the person is level, that amygdala has calmed down. We've done some coping tools so that we can actually turn on that part of the brain that's able to have a conversation, right? When somebody's triggered, that's not the time to be like, what's going on, right? They don't have words for it in that moment. They have to calm down first, regulate first, and then they'll have words for you. I know you guys know all that. The next escalation we're going to talk about is questioning. And questioning is can come in two forms. One is information seeking, and one is challenging. Now, these can kind of be tough because of the tone, right? So an information seeking conversation may sound like, excuse me, you're not supposed to be in this hallway. Well, I got kicked out of class. Where am I supposed to go? Well, the response to an information seeking question is going to be to give a rational response. Well, let's go to the office. Let's go to see your counselor. Let's go check it out with your teacher, right? Whatever your normal format is, using a rational response to respond to an information seeking question. Now, a challenging question might sound a little more like, hey, you're not supposed to be in this hallway. Who are you supposed to be? I got kicked out of class. Well, what we want to do is downplay the challenge and stick to the topic, right? So what we're going to do is not respond to who am I supposed to be, right? Or it may be you're a new person in the building. Hi, my name's Miss Bell. It's nice to meet you. Let's go ahead and find out where you're supposed to be, right? So it's really important that you always downplay the challenge and not feed into the escalation. The next thing we're going to talk about is intimidation. Now, intimidation is where we interact with the safety interventions. So, intimidation is verbal or nonverbal threats to harm self or harm others. So, we want to first say we want to take all safety issues seriously. It is very, very important that we take these things seriously. Now, we want to make sure that we're protecting the individual, protecting ourselves, and protecting anyone in the audience. So this is going to take some strategic thinking and planning ahead of time, and some on-your-feet adaptions as we're exploring or doing different situations. So the safety interventions that we use, which are the push-pull, the restraints, the stabilize and hold, the lever, all those things that we went through in CPI, we have to make sure that before we use a safety intervention, that it is reasonable, that is proportionate to what's happening, and that it is least restrictive. So least restrictive is where it comes into this portion of, do we remove the student? Do we remove the audience? Do we clear the building, right? It depends. It has to be proportionate to what's happening in the space. And again, I want to reinforce, there are no safety interventions for non-compliance, okay? If there is, and this is a tough one, right? If there is a student, let's say we're in a school, if there's a student that is refusing to do work and throws their paper on the floor, I'm not doing it. No, I'm not doing it. I don't care. Call my mom, right? And doing all the things. Definitely refusal, right? But it is not a threat to themselves or to others. Disrespectful, yes. Attitude, yes. All kinds of things that are not okay, right? But in that moment, you, according to CPI, are not authorized to use a restraint, to use some type of hold. This is not a safety intervention moment. This is where we use those de-escalation tools, or perhaps a turn and talk tool, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, it's really, really important that we remember, I'm going to say it one more time, there are no safety interventions for non-compliance. Okay, all right, I think I said that enough. The last stage of escalation that we're going to look at is actually tension reduction. And tension reduction is one of the most important parts of the escalation process, because it is when there is a decrease in physical and emotional energy. And it's really important. This may look like all of a sudden now I'm crying, I'm beginning to shut down, I'm apologizing, I'm experiencing a lot of shame. I run out of the space to be alone, right? And this is the moment, not where we say, now tell me what's going on, right? This is the moment that we reestablish the relationship with the student or the individual. This is where we're going to use those coping tools, right? This is really important. Again, we talk about that thermometer and the thermostat. Sometimes just sitting down with someone who is crying and just saying like, wow, sounds like you have some really big feelings. I'm just going to take a deep breath sitting here with you. That feels a little better. I'm going to take another one, right? Doing those things, that is being the thermostat in the room, right? We want to use those coping tools, and we want to use an affirming tone. Now, when someone has acted a donkey, they usually know they have acted a donkey, and there is shame, there is guilt, embarrassment, all these different feelings that come around. And so we want to make sure that we use an affirming tone and that we reestablish the relationship at this point. Now that we have gone over the de-escalation tools and just ran through some of the things to remember when we are using safety interventions, I'm going to show you two videos that have my favorite safety intervention in them, and they break down again how to do the turn and talk. Now, I don't know what they call it. I think just a turn, but I like to call it a turn and talk, right? Because essentially what we're doing is we are turning a student or turning an individual away from the crisis and walking with them away. Now, this is not carrying a student. This is not transporting a student if the student is walking on their own in a supportive way. Now, it's important that as you watch these videos that you remember that these are CPI interventions. When it comes to moving in to students, it's important that you also remember your supportive stance, that you're making sure that you're ready to handle these things, right? This isn't necessarily something where just anybody can say, that's easy, I'll go ahead and do that, right? But we do want to make sure that those of you who are CPI trained, that you are using the correct model and stance in order to do these safety interventions. If you are struggling with that idea of transporting students or transporting individuals, these are the two things that I would recommend. So, without further ado.
Next, we'll look at how the principles can be used to move the person away from a situation involving medium risk behavior. Begin with the supportive stance, standing close behind the person. Place your hand nearest to the person over one shoulder. Place your hand furthest from the person behind the other shoulder. Apply the pull-push principle to the person's shoulder, prompting them to turn. Move your hands from the person's shoulders and apply the hold and stabilize principle to their elbows. Guide the person to a place of safety. This time, let's look at how we can use the principles to move the person away from a situation involving high-risk behavior. Always begin with the supportive stance, standing close behind the person. Place your hand nearest to the person under their arm, holding their shoulder as close as possible. Place your hand furthest from the person behind the other shoulder. Apply the lever principle by stepping back with your foot closest to the person. Hold the person's shoulder as close as possible as you prompt them to turn. Move your hands from the person's shoulders and apply the hold and stabilize principle to their elbows. Guide the person to a place of safety.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for watching the video. If you have any questions, please, please, please reach out. That is exactly what we're here for. And we have a whole team of CPI gurus behind us to really make sure that you have the answers to the questions that you need. So I hope you have a great day. And I will say, I hope you are able to de-escalate 90% of what you are experiencing before it becomes a crisis.